Um, we were talking, right? We are now done with functions. You should understand functions. We're going to talk about using objects, and then we are going to go back to passing objects to functions and things like that. So we are going to go over functions, more stuff about functions. But and in another few weeks, we'll see how to create your own objects and your own classes, but not now, right? A object has three things: an identity, which uniquely distinguishes this object from any other object; a type of class, which defines all the operators it can do; and a state, which is unique to this particular object, right? Although other objects may have the same state. We need to distinguish between objects and variables. Variables hold references to objects, so two variables could be referring to the same object, right? Two objects can never be the same. Two different objects are two different objects, even though they may have the same state. But variables, two different variables may reference the same object. Two different expressions may reference the same object. Simple examples. How do you create an object? How do you create an object? New, right? New java.awt. Can I do anything to that object, to that particular object? Not anymore, because I didn't keep a reference to it, right? What do I do to get a reference to it? I could create, well, a different. Oops. Oh, I need to do java.awt.point, right? Because that's the full name of the class. Is this annoying as hell? Having to type that long name. What do I do? I can do java.awt.point or this, and I get all of them. I get rectangle and dimension and all of them. Now after this, I don't need to write, right? So I can do p1 equals new point. New 0.35. Does that make sense? It just saves me type, that's right. The name of the class is still java.awt.point. It's just that I got an easier way to talking about it. Does this idea make sense? So I create objects with new. I can assign objects to variables. I can call methods on objects, right? And we are going to talk about point, dimension, and rectangle, because they are simple classes that have all this stuff that we need. Then we're going to see some other classes. So create an object with a new keyword. We normally declare variables, point p, and then assign, right? New point or dimension d equals new dimension, right? And so on. Normally you want to assign values to your variables. If not, they're unassigned and that is bad and you don't know what they have. Null is a value that you can assign to variables, not to objects, right? And that's used to represent this variable is not pointing to any object right now. Does that make sense? What happens if I do dumb things with my types? Point p equals new dimension. What's going to happen? I get some sort of compiler error, right? In Java REPL is not quite a compiler, so, but it tells me, right? It's like, oh, wait, you can't. Your box is square, you cannot fit a triangle in there. I can call methods. I had p1, right? So I can do p1.getX, and that will return me its x value as a double. I can also reference instance variables. If you haven't done so, go play with these kinds of things, right? We have a couple of important things. I think I forgot to mention one more, but that's okay. The equal operator, when given two object references, checks whether they refer to the same object. Does that make sense? So, what am I going to get? Is new point equals to new point? No, because I got two different objects. Does that make sense? I also have, I think, not equals, which is the inverse. Does that idea make sense? I also have a dot equals method. Which normally compares whether they are equal in some semantic way, right? So since both of those points are at 0, 0, equals would return true. Make sense? Cool. A couple of other methods. We have toString, which will return a string representation of the object that may or may not be useful. Most of the Java classes now have a nice representation like this, but not all of them do. We have an object class, and that one has a horrible toString. Very generic class, doesn't have anything useful, but it still has a toString, right? I have a clone method. Cloning will do a, I should actually write stuff, but cloning will do a shallow copy. So it will create a new object and it will copy all the variables. If those objects are references to other objects, it will not copy the whole object graph, it will just make a one-level copy. Usually, unless it doesn't. Again, all of these things can be overridden, right? So they can do all sorts of stuff. What happens to the objects you drop on the floor? Eventually, Java comes and cleans them up, right? When you call new, or the JVM will tell the operating system, give me some memory, right? I need 10 bytes for this guy, right? Eventually, if you keep doing that, you run out of bytes, right? Java has garbage collection, so at some point in time, when an object is not referenced anymore by anybody, it can be garbage collected. So eventually, Java will tell the operating system, I don't need these 10 bytes anymore. When? Who knows? But you can usually be slightly careless with that stuff, especially with small programs. Does that idea make sense? And that is important. Not every language does. C++ is an example of one that doesn't, right? So, let's talk about functions and stuff. So let's talk more about functions. I'm gonna do it in this guy. Yeah. Okay. What happens when I do this? Public static void change int. What does this function do? It tries to increment a by 1, right? So what happens if I do int my int equals 1, change int my int, and then print line my int? What would it print? What would this print?
Int plus 1.
So what would it print?
What did it start with? It starts at 1, so it would print 2.
2? Who says 2? Raise your hand. Cool. You're all wrong, but you're brave for raising your hand. Why didn't you run this thingy? Didn't I tell you to run it? It is hidden here. What did it print? 1, not 2. Why?
The increment didn't take over yet, so next time you do it, it's going to show 2.
You think? Shall we do it a bunch of times?
No, he's talking about. He's talking about pass by reference, so it's not going to change.
Yeah, it's not going to change. If you
It's not going to change ever. Why? Because it makes a copy, right? This A is a copy of this my int, right? I make a photocopy and then I change the photocopy. Did the original change? No, I cannot change it. When I'm passing primitives like int and double and float, I cannot change them. Does that make sense? A copy gets made, and so I cannot touch that copy. Does that idea make sense? Yes? Okay, now if I do actually, let me not call it P. My point, right? The names don't matter, right? But I just don't want to use the same name because that would confuse you. What's going to happen in this case? I make a copy of the variable, so this also does absolutely nothing, right? I get a different reference to the same object. I change the reference, so nothing happens. This would print what?
3 and 5.
No. 10 and 20. The change doesn't stick. Does that make sense? You have a reference, right? You changed the reference, the change didn't stick. You didn't change the object, you just changed the reference, and that reference is not accessible outside. Is your, like a local variable, right, in your parameter. Now, if I do p dot x equals or plus equals 1, and then p dot y times equals 2, right? I am not changing the reference, I am changing the state of that object, right? Java will not make a copy of the object, it will make a copy of the reference, but now both of these guys refer to the same object, so this actually changes the values on that point. Does that make sense? So if I run this, I get 11 and 40 instead of 10 and 20. Because this changed the x and the y of that point. Because it got a reference to that point and is able to change the state of that object. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there any way to change the state of a variable that you incidentally pass as a parameter to a method?
No.
So you can't.
You would need to somehow wrap that thing into an object and pass the object.
Yeah, and that seems kind of awkward.
Yeah. You shouldn't be changing stuff. In a way,
Okay.
the problem is that you can change that guy. Because when you pass things to objects, right? When you pass things to functions, you would expect to behave kind of like a math function, right? Give you something back. You don't, right? When you call sign on a number, you don't expect the number to change, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in here, you're passing an object and that object changed. In a way, this is the surprise. This is the WTF.
So you just don't want to be changing those values within methods anyway. So the fact that you can't
You
do
don't want to do it because it's confusing, because now you need to think about time. What was the value? Now what's the value after
the
this?
method should just be simple. It should just do like the thing that it
Yes.
says, and it should not be trying to.
Although in this case, the name of the method is descriptive, right? It's actually really change it, so.
Yeah, but normally it just does something else.
It's a lot easier to think about functions if they don't change their stuff, right? It is definitely important to make obvious that they're changing stuff, right? If you do, double point. It's returning a point, right? If I do p dot x times equals to p dot y times equals to return p, right? I doubled the x and the y. I can do
Okay, yeah, that's one way to do it. Yeah.
this stuff, right? And it actually does the right thing in that it returns the double, but it has a side effect in that it actually changes the point, right? So it's gonna print the same value twice, right? It's gonna print 2040 in both cases, which is somewhat bad because I actually changed the point without making it super explicit, right? The right way to do something like this would be p.
It's ambiguous with double point p. It's like, do you want to look at a double point p or actually double it?
Yes, and so p equals p dot clone unless point is not clonable. I need to cast it. Clone is an object method, so it returns an object, so I need to cast it to a point. Now this would do the right thing. It would return the double of the point, but it would create the clone first, so it doesn't actually change the point that is passed. So it would print 2040 and then 1020. Which to me is a lot better. Right? If you are doing bunches of things and calling things, it's a lot better if they don't go changing stuff. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes you want to change stuff, right? But it's a lot better if you don't go change stuff along the way. It is important to know that you cannot change primitive values, right, that are passed as parameters. They're passed by copy. You cannot change references, right? They're passed by copy. You can change the state of the objects that are passed by reference to you. Does that make sense? You can change the state of the objects for which you got a reference. Make sense? What do you need to do for this to make sense? Practice, right? And it's a lot better if you practice 15 minutes a day, right? So if you practice it tonight when you get home and then you practice it tomorrow, and after doing it 2 or 3 times with slightly different things, right? Then it becomes natural and obvious. Go do it rather than wait until you have to do it for the assignment and then you're in trouble. Does that idea make sense? I can make, and we actually did, right? Points, I can return objects, right, from a function and things like that. And we just did an example, right? So good. And here we did it by calling p.clone, right? So what this...
You're always going to have to use a new command for that. Or
a new operator or something that returns a new object, right? Clone returns a new object.
So clone creates a new object.
Yes. Okay. And new would also do that. Somebody has to call new, may not be you.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
whoever you call. But. Strings are weird. Really, really weird. They are objects. They are not primitives, right? You know that they are objects because in Java, by convention, all of the class names starts with capital letters. String is capital S string. Int is lowercase I, right? Does that idea make sense? So, string is a class. However, Java does weird stuff in that when it sees a string constant, right, double quotation marks and then a bunch of letters in the middle, it will go look to see if it has created one already with that same value. And if it is, it will not call new, it will not create a new one, it will just give you the same one. Does that make sense? What does this mean? That many times equal actually works on strings. Almost by chance, because if you call new, then it's not the same. So ABC equals ABC would return, true. Maybe. Eventually.
What if you say like S1 equals ABCD, S2 equals ABC, and then you change S1 to equal ABC?
Then no.
Okay.
Actually, you cannot change. Strings are immutable. They are not changeable. You can never change a string on purpose. So you cannot confuse yourself too much.
When you change it, it's a different string?
What do you mean you change it? Yes. Yes. I can never change it. I can add or do things to it, but it doesn't change the string. Like, can do string s1 equals abc, right? And then s1 plus equal def, right? So s1 is abcdef, but that's a new string. And so, right, so I didn't change the string abc. In fact, right, what happens if I do s1 equals abcdef? What would this return? What happens, well, what would this return? That's easy. True, right? That's what S1 is, ABCDEF. So dot equal should return true. What would equal return? False, because they are not the same object. One is a string constant, the other one was created by Java. We knew when it added stuff. Does that make sense? And so ABC equals ABC is true, but ABC equals new string ABC is not true. Moral of the story, use dot equals, don't use equal. Unless that's what you mean. It's a super common mistake in code to use equal. And when you're creating the constants in your test cases or something like that, it passes because it's the same string constant. You go read something from a file and now equal doesn't work.
Was this always true in C++? Or
No, C++ is different than...
Okay. Because I don't remember this from C++.
In a way, C++ doesn't have equal. Let me do an aside. If you have never seen C++, just close your ears for a minute. In C++, equal does dot equals. So it calls the, and you would need to compare pointers. So you need to compare addresses. You need to check ampersand A equals ampersand B to do what equal does in Java. But C++ is weird, and you can shoot yourself in the foot much easier than with Java. You can still shoot yourself in the foot with Java, or in any other appendages. But it's harder. Does this idea make sense? Some other things, and I thought that I had this stuff. I need to come back and add to my notes, but some other things that we can do with strings. I know what happened. I messed myself up. Let me go talk about, I had it here, and I never put them into all the nodes. Yeah, functions and strings. Maybe? Nah, we'll do this one. There are some other cool things that we can do with strings. And I will add them to the notes, politicians promise, but let me do some of them as we go. First of all, we can ask, string, what's your length? And if I type it correctly, it will tell me. This is my length. 3. Does that make sense? I can also do to uppercase, maybe. And that will, right? Notice that I'm not changing my string again, right? I'm creating a new string. My string can never be changed, right? S1 is still, lowercase, but by doing this, I, right? So I can do S1 is mixed case with some capitals and so lower to uppercase will give me all uppercase to lowercase would give me all lowercase, right? And I'm not changing my string. My string cannot change, right? I cannot change the state of a string. Strings as objects are immutable. My references, my variables can change. My objects cannot. Another cool thing that I can do is car add. What would s1.car@0 return? Capital M, right? One letter, not a string, a letter, right? A character. So I can check, is this equal to capital M? Notice that I'm using single quotes rather than double quotes. Single quotes give me character constants, double quotes give me string constants, right? Are they equal to the string M? Now no, you cannot compare strings and characters, right? Because they are two different things. One is a bunch of things and the other one is a one thing. Does this make sense? Some sense? Questions? So we have length, we have car add, and then we have other kinds of things like to uppercase, to lowercase. Strings also have dot equals, dot clone, all of those, right? The other guys that we saw. Any questions on strings? No? Let's do this. Let's create a string that will get me a function that will get me the first character of a string. It returns a character, not a string. What do I do? How do I get the first character of a string? Car add, right? Almost. We start at 0, right? In C, and so in programming, we start counting at 0. You remember kindergarten? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? They lie to you. Friggin' teachers are horrible. We start counting at 0. It's 0, 1, 2, 3. And after this class, you would count at 0. It's kind of an accident, but yeah, it is better. Just in case you care, and especially if you're taking a computer architecture class, right? What happens is that what these things are doing is using the address, right? And so if you start at 1, you would need to keep your addresses wrong and always add 1. Whereas if you start at 0, you can just use like the address of the whole array is the address of the first element. So when they did C, when that was actually important, they started at 0, and so we have kept it forever. It makes sense for computers to start at 0, and that is why. What other things can we do? How can we get the last character? We are going to use car add, but what do we do? Sorry? 25? Why 25? Yes, we need to use the length of the string, right? Well, actually, this is important. What happens if we do horrible stuff that's not there, right? What do I do car add of 25? I get error, right? There is no character 25, same as if I do something like -2, right? So in here, I need to use would this work? If my string is ABC, right? What's the length?
It's going to be 3.
The length is 3. The last character is character number 2. So what do I need to do to this? Yes. Does this make sense? we actually got it. Ah! What would this print? This would hopefully print A, this would print 3, and what would this print? No, that would be if they are strings, they would concatenate and do A3. If they are characters, they're really just small integers, so that would be some horrible Unicode character, some horrible thing in ASCII, right? A is, I don't know, 65 and 3 is 37, and so that would be 120 or something like that. I don't know what the numbers are nor how to add. So this would print some weird letter. It would print 1, or it'll print 8, then it'll print 3, and then it'll print something weird. Printed 148. Did the addition as integers, right? Your characters are really just integers. Computers don't really know about letters. They just deal with numbers, right? And so somebody just came and said, oh, A is 65, B is 66, C is 67, or something like that, right? So actually, if we do actually, I lied to you. A is 97. And 1 is 51. Oh, sorry, 3 is 51.
So it didn't take the 3? I thought L was 3.
Well, at an int is 51, right? Because when they came up with ASCII, they said, oh, 51 represents the digit 3. And 48 represents the digit 0. And now I cast these things as ints, so now I print them as ints. If I print them as chars, right, then it will print actually A and 3. And by adding two characters together, I have to cast them as ints, and so it will print the int value of that stuff. What happens if I do this? Now it will print A3. Because it concatenates the empty string plus A, so that's the string containing the letter A, and now plus gets interpreted as concatenation. Make sense? Yes? So cool? Cool. You know all there is to know about strings? You know a little bit of strings. Now, oh, yeah. I will add this stuff. There is string.format allows you to format your strings, right, and add, like, if you're printing 3.5, you can control how many decimals you print and all of that stuff. String.format allows you to do all of that in a manner very similar to printf in C++, for those of you who have done C++. But I tend to not use it normally. There is a couple of other classes that are weird the other way. One of them is Printstream. It's java.io.printstream, which represents a string of characters to which you can print stuff, right? System.out is actually an instance of Printstream. So to any print stream, you can call the println method, right? What we have been doing when we do system.out.println, right, is there is a class called system that has a variable, a member variable like the x in our point called out, right? But that member variable is another object of type printstream, and so we call the println method on it, and we pass a string. And if what we pass is not a string, Java will call the toString method of that thing and convert it to a string. Does that make sense? So I can actually call in here system.out.println. Right? Makes sense-ish. I could God, I am horrible. I'm a horrible person. I could define a function called makeTranslated_point that takes a point and a print stream and then prints to that print stream, right? Calls println on that print stream to print that point piece. Does that make sense? And what can that print stream be? Could be whatever, but a simple way is to, when I call it, pass system.out. That function is horrible because should not be makeTranslated_point, should be something printTranslated_point. Does this make sense? Why would I do that instead of just call system.out.println? There is two advantages, right? One is, what other things could I print to instead of the screen? Could print to a file, could print to the network, right? So by parameterizing it, I could pass other things, right? Which we're probably not going to do in this class. The other thing is that this tells you that you are probably going to be changing the state of that print stream object, right? So rather than your function just randomly printing stuff on the screen, I'm making it explicit that I'm giving you a print stream so you could do things to it. Does that make sense? That makes, at least you're changing state, but you're not changing the global state, right? Changing the global state is horrible because if every function could change the global state, you get really confused really, really quick. So at least this makes it explicit that you could change the state of that print stream. Weird thing about print streams is we normally cannot just read their full state. They are on the screen or on a file or something like that. We cannot, within our program, read the full state. But does this idea make sense? Some sense. Cool. We'll go over this again next class. But go play, right? We will use the scanner class a lot. Java has this problem that it's been going on for 20-something years, right? 95 it became popular. I think it started a little bit before that. It's been like 22 years, so they have done all sorts of things. And they try to keep compatibility. So they try not to mess up the previous things, right? So initially they created an input stream, kind of like the print stream. And then everybody hated that thing, and so they decided to create a scanner class. But they already had a input stream variable called system.in, right? And so what they did is it created this scanner class that actually takes an input stream as a parameter in the constructor. And so we have this scanner class, and we normally pass it system.in. And now we can read stuff from there, right? Next line will actually read a full line. So let me see if this, I can make this without confusing things. I can do it in, this may confuse this stuff. Probably created. So I can do s dot next line. And that destroys this thing so badly. Did it destroy it? There. S dot next line messes it up. Oh well, never mind. This just confuses the thing, so let's do it in here. Right? In here, I can do so if I run this guy, right, s.nextLine is going to read something from the keyboard-ish, from system.in, and then it's going to print it in uppercase, so I can print. Then it prints it in uppercase. Does that make sense? Is this cool or what? What? Okay. Assignment 2 requires you to do a bunch of functions with objects, and some of them I'll be passing you scanners and print streams. In a way, they're slightly weird. In other ways, they're not weird, right? You're just getting an object and you call methods on the object. And it doesn't matter which object and which methods. They do things, right? When you call car at of 0 on a string, it returns a value. When you call next line on a scanner, it returns a value.
When you call a method like dot next line dot to uppercase, like when you have in theory you could like keep going with like all
yes.
And when you do that, is it always just like it does one after the other, or
just like when you do 3 plus 5 plus 7 minus 2.
Okay.
Right? So
but sometimes in a more complicated method, it might affect the next one, or
well,
it might be
yeah, but like
okay.
s.nextLine, right, returns a string, and then I call to uppercase on that string that was returned by this guy.
Okay, so it's like okay, this is okay. So it's like the last one is of.
Sorry?
Are you saying like it's not like an order of operation or anything? Kind of thing, is that what you're asking? Or?
I'm imagining scenarios where they could really get complicated and mess with each other is what I'm thinking. And I'm asking, is it always simple? And
It is always done from left to right, right? They are all like when you do 3 plus 5 plus 7, it's always 3 plus 5, and then the result of that plus 7. So in this case, it's always going to be s.nextLine, and on whatever that thing returns, you call dot to uppercase.
okay.
Right?
So that's a way to think.
Now, yes, it can become complicated as hell, right? And if you think about it, I'm calling this attached to this other method call,
Yeah.
right? So if I do s dot to uppercase dot next line, what does s dot to uppercase return? Well, S is a scanner. S dot to uppercase doesn't work.
Yeah.
The scanner class doesn't have a to uppercase, so you can't.
Okay.
The types don't work. Does this make sense? Some sense.
We can use any other function then?
Yes. And you would go to look at documentation and look at all the functions. We'll cover a few in here, not all of them by any. When you have a chance, right? Go look at these kinds of things, right? I'm an idiot and my scanner class doesn't link the right way. But like Printstream, here's all the stuff that it has, right? The Java documentation, once you get used to it, it's actually not that terrible. But has a tons of things that you can do and you can go look. And it's probably not a bad idea to, when you don't have much to do, right? Go look at those things and say, hey, Java string API or string API documentation. Oh, okay, there it is. So let me go see all the other things that I can call on a string, right? And which one of this do I understand? Which ones do I not understand? Maybe let me go look at what this is. And let me go look at what this is. That kind of stuff.
Can you mess around with an object in such a way that say you take an object and you're like object dot you take a value within that object and you say and you're like it's a number and you're like dot add some number, so then you take that and you're like two string and then you're like two uppercase.
Yes.
And you're like two
Yes, you can.
whatever, and then
Yes.
you just keep going with okay.
Yes, you can. And in fact, right now you should, right? You should be doing that stuff just to practice, right?
For like testing purposes, do we need to have big memorizations from this, or because we'd always be able to reference to it, just know how to find our reference?
I would expect you to find your reference. To, like for the test, you don't have a reference, right? But I tend to make it so that I will not ask you to memorize any of these things, right? I would expect you to know equals to string, right? And that plus and minus, right? But like, I think I would even like, if I ask you to do something, like with reminder, I would tell you percent is a reminder because you may not remember that, right? But you can ask me on a test, what was the method, right? I know there is a method to convert a string to uppercase, but I don't remember what it's called.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
I tend to not do those things, but
Okay,
if
yeah,
you
just
needed
see
to, you
which
could.
way I needed to focus on.
No. Don't memorize them. Google is always there. But on the other hand, by using those things, right, you should normally memorize a bunch of them. It is amazing the amount of abuse that humans can take. It is amazing how much useless information we'll memorize. And it would feel natural, right? I mean, you would remember ASCII codes for the character 0 and things like that because you use them. If you think about it, kind of, you can probably list all 50 states in the US if you grew up here, right? They tortured you with that, and you know all the abbreviations for postal codes, what do they map to, right? And horrible tons of things that there is no particular reason to memorize, but you would spend all your day in Google if you had to Google all of that stuff. And so it's not, it's a good idea for, especially at the beginning, to kind of come, look at these things and say, oh, okay, yeah, right, oh, what the heck is this code point, right? What the heck is a code point? That may be something that you go look and say, oh, compare ignore case, oh, that, right? So I know that I can do it with, without caring about uppercase, right, and those kinds of things. Kind of just to have an idea of what's there. just to know what to Google. But I definitely don't expect you to know this stuff. Cool. We have a few more minutes, right? Should we do a couple more examples by passing things and, right? Let's come do it here. By the way, if you notice, when we do stuff here, we add noise words. What are those noise words? Public static, right? We're adding it to every method. What do you do for now? Add them to every method. We'll see what they really mean when we talk about classes. But basically what they mean is that they are not attached to an instance, so you wouldn't need to call new before calling these guys. But for now, consider them as magical incantations that you do. Prints a string twice. How do we do that? What can we call on a print stream to print something? What method do we call? What method do we call on system.out to print stuff? Println, right? So we could call it on any kind of print stream. We can call it on system.out because system.out is a print stream, right? So we can call out.println. How do we print a string? And then we call it again. Right? How do we call it here? Print twice, right? It returns void. What does it mean? It returns nothing, so I cannot do anything with the return value, right? So it prints twice, passes a string, ABC. And then how can I pass it a print string? Well, system.out happens to be a print string, right? Does this make sense? When I run this, what do I expect to see?
ABC 1, 2, 3, ABC 1, 2, 3.
Yep. Does this make sense?
Could you run that with something besides system.out?
I could if I had other way to creating print streams. We haven't seen any way to create a print stream other than getting system.out. I can, you cannot.
Okay.
Have you done like a scanner next line where it would take the ABC and then copy that to the next line, so then you would essentially get the same line out twice?
I cannot insert things into Scanner,
Okay.
right? I can read stuff from Scanner. Let me actually, where do we want to go? Do we want to, let me combine one with a Scanner and then we'll do weird stuff to create print streams and stuff. How about, so this function should read a line and then print it twice. Has a very imaginative name, read line and print it twice. How can I read a line from a scanner? Sorry. Next line, sorry. Cool. Right? Now, that's a string. How can I print it twice? Well, I could, but wouldn't it be nicer if I had a function that could print something twice? Does this make sense? And I would call it like scanner in equals new scanner. Does this make sense? Yes. Possibly yes.
It's fine.
Java has input and output streams that sort of kind of so I could let's see if we can do horrible things rather than this. Let me do input stream I have a byte array input stream, right? And I pass it ABC123 bytes into /n. So this will be a string that has ABC123, right? And then /n, which is a new line character, and then and stuff, right? So when I read from this, right, if instead of creating it from system.in, I'll create it from is, which is the name of this variable. And so what this will print is hopefully ABC123 twice. In a really convoluted way. Does that make sense? I created an input stream that reads from an array of bytes, and I created that array of bytes by calling getBytes on a string. We'll talk about arrays.
It doesn't read after the new line?
Because the new line, right? Here we just called in.nextLine, so we read one line, not two. It will not read that after the new line because I only asked it to read one line. You only called in.nextLine once, right? So there's no need to read the next line. I could do this twice, and now it will read both of them, hopefully, and print them twice.
And all you did was you duplicated the.
I called it again, right? Yeah.
Wait, what did that change?
I called this function, readLine, and print it twice, right? I pass it that scanner. So inside this function, I call next line, and that will return ABC123, right? And move the scanner, right? So it returns ABC123 and skips this slash n. So the next read will start at the A.
It's because because of the in dot next line.
Because that's what next line does, right? It reads from the stream until it sees a new line character and then it stops reading, right? And returns the whole line.
Isn't the string an object? So if you're
The
changing
string
an
is an
object-
object, but the byte array input stream, it's also an object, but it's not a string anymore. It's a byte array input stream.
So if you hadn't done that get byte thing, then it would still read all of the.
If it wouldn't do it, then it wouldn't let me do, right? The types wouldn't work. I'm transforming that stuff in horrible ways, as he was asking, right? This wouldn't work because I cannot create a byte array input stream from a string. I can only create it from an array of bytes. Oops. But that's not a string anymore. It's a byte array input string. It's a different object, right?
Okay.
Am I making some sense? This should be confusing, but you asked. It's your fault.
So because you're creating a new object when you. Okay. But it's just not that it's the same string and you change it within the reline and twice
No.
when it changed. It's because now you're talking about the byte array input stream.
Yes.
Okay.
And so next line on it would read, right, until it sees a new line, which is what the keyboard does when you type, right? So now I called next line twice. The first time it called it, it returned ABC123. The second time it returned and stuff, right? And you could create your own input streams that do other horrible things. Just Java happens to have this one. Does this make some sense? We'll try for it to make more sense next class. Let me quickly go over, since we have a couple of minutes, right? 4 whole minutes. Woo. We are now covering module 2. We have talked about it, but let's talk about it. This would be kind of a non-canonical first program in Java. We would import the scanner class. We need to create a class always. Not in Java REPL, but in Java you do. We need to create a main method, and that's where our execution is going to start, right? For now, copy that stuff, right? Copy and paste that stuff. Here we create a variable called input of type scanner. We assign it a new scanner that started from system.in. We call system.out.println, please enter your name, call next line, and then print hello concatenated with name. You understand all this does now, right? Cool. Then let's go home and let's talk on Wednesday. Questions?
Did you import like Java dot and then put the asterisk?
Yes.
Scanner?
Java.star wouldn't work because it only does Java.util.star would.
Okay.
I think actually, no. Yeah, no, it's not imported by default. Java.lang is imported by default, but Java.util is not, I think.
It would be like a good best practice at the beginning, when you get more advanced, just like importing like everything, or just go over the.
Depending on what you do, depending on how you like it, it's probably not the best practice to import stuff that you don't use.
Yeah.
When you're starting, it is not horrible to import java.util.star or something like that. It's not bad. The IDE will usually complain and will usually autocomplete for you. So, like, if I'm using, this is idea, right? If I put, say, list, it will automatically add the import. So I don't even have to think about it. That's IDEs are cool, right? That's the point. But so you don't really have to do that stuff. And then as you learn, you'll probably be able to tell your IDE kind of the other way around. You can tell it how to format my code and optimize imports, so eliminate all the stuff that I imported. So many times, halfway through, you change your mind, and so you imported byte array input stream, but then you end up not using it because you change your code, right? And so normally the IDE, you can tell it, delete all the manure that I didn't need. Cool. See you guys